Hello, Mike. Yeah, it's been very busy, and we had quite a lot of feedback as well. The guys enjoyed it. Some asked me, "But why didn't you say this? Why did you say that?" I said, "Listen, remember, I said what I can remember. I mean, especially with the MIG involvement, when we had the mix here. But all good, thanks, Mike. It's warming up in South Africa. It's nice and hot. Tomorrow, I think in Kukuza, it's 40 degrees, and that's Celsius. Oh, very quick. And started in 1974 and joined the Air Force. Harvard, initially T6G. Some people might know that better. Doing our training, then wings, moved on to the Impalas, Eremachi, the Mark 1, and wings in 75. And from there, posted to 8 Squadron Impala, started doing the Mark 2 Impala. And then carried on until I went on to Mirage course. We did it on the Mirage 3s, and from there to 3 Squadron on the F1CZ. Quite a few years there, a lot of courses and things in between. Instructors course back onto the Harvards, then on Palas, and then back to F1s. And then my last stint was on the Cheetahs at Louis Trigger before I left the Air Force in 1999 at the end. I'll do so, Mike. And incidentally, you could see the background is not so military. It's not back to you and the SAA ones. But anyway, well, we can start with Ryan Hart. And why I picked that one first is also Donkey for Dienst op die Grenze. Nice Afrikaans. Ryan, thanks so much. You mentioned that the Russian radar system overpowered the Cheetah radar system. So please, can you tell us how you outsmarted Ivan, it must be Ivan's tactic of microwaving your life. Well, basically, it was also when we did setups. That was now not in combat. I mean, that was in training when the Russians visited us here for the arms deal when that came along. So the bottom line is we tried our EW. Obviously, it did mess them a little bit, but the bottom line is to just go down and then try and pitch up from underneath. So you can't really dodge the radar. The problem is the Russian, for them, is the aircraft are so big. The Cheetah is small, it's well camouflaged. So once you can duck underneath, even with the radar, they're not sure where you are. That's basically all we could do. Um, in the Angola conflict times, we had the MiG-21s, and their radars, obviously, we didn't have good radar, they didn't have good radar. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks for the Afrikaans, appreciate that part. Somebody asked me, it was Cosmic, what is your call sign, South African Air Force, and why that call sign? Well, funnily enough, mine was Jester. And at the time when we started the call signs at the squadron, which was C Squadron, we were not allowed to pick your own call sign. And I was given Jester, so I must probably be in the squadron clown, not being married, one of the few. And that stuck. I mean, that stayed with us. The officer commanding, obviously, we wanted to call him Scully because that was what we called him. Of course, we called him Commandant, and he just stuck to says, "No, I'm Snipe." So he didn't choose his own. He could choose his own call sign, but we couldn't. Later on, I was actually a staff officer in headquarters when we started running the whole project, because during the conflict as well, having a call sign, and I can attest to what happened in the Angolan conflict. When you hear Heart 49 and eventually you know who he is, it's so easy. It's a huge security risk. So we didn't use call signs during the conflict, only afterwards. So hopefully that makes sense. Then from Frank Moody, evening. Did you know a cheetah pilot called Cougar by any chance? Yes, 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 yes. I'm trying to think. Oh, Cougar kept dropping his drag chute on Cape Town International Runway during AAD 1 year. Was there a reason he couldn't keep it attached until the taxiway? Cougar, I have to really now. Yes, I know Cougar, but the name eludes me. But anyway, I think in AAD, if you say that was in Cape Town, that's usually up in Waterkloof, Air Force Base Waterkloof, or Waterkloof in English, Cape Town International. The only reason I can think is that maybe that specific aircraft had a bit of a problem with the drag chute. It's quite a hydraulic device. I mean, you slap it back, and the claws the claws are open when the drag chute is in the aircraft. And once you deploy it, you have to be very quick to catch that thing. And that's designed like that, so if it does deploy for whatever reason during flight, it will just drop out. So sorry, Frank, I can't answer that one. I will, however, make sure I get to know who Cobus is. I'm sure I know the name. The memory fades me at the moment. From Predator, what was your scariest moment in the Mirage F1? Most probably, one night we were going to do night flying. We did a lot of night flying. I can't remember the date. We've got the logbooks here if you really want to know. And I think that was most probably the scariest part, was that evening when I got to work. I was a squadron hog at the time as well. And I said they wanted to do a quick test flight on an aircraft. And I said, well, for sure, let me go and do the test flight. The rules stated no test flights during dark. So it was becoming dusk. So I said, let me get out. And the compass swings were already done. Jumped into the F1. Got out, and afterburn, a full afterburn, all the way you climb up, do certain checks and tests. You go to Mach 1.4 when the overspeed kicks in, just to make check, and the rest. All I did was I came back out of afterburn, and I left that throttle right in the front, 100% high power. When I joined Initial, it was really getting very, very darkish, but not dark, just before dark. And we usually restricted to 400 knots on Initial due to noise abatement and, of course, also the proximity of OR Tambo, which was called Jan Smuts at the time. And when I closed it, so I was turning on to downwards, it was just one huge explosion. And I had no idea what was wrong. It rattled so much I could hardly speak to the ATC. And instinctively, what you do is you just pull up. Forgot to mention I had 500 knots, and that saved my butt. Pulled it up, and it just shows you how training just kicks in. Heading towards the south east, which is the ejection area. That came out later. I mean, I didn't know what, you just look and see the temperatures of what's happening. It was vibrating so much. I knew it was the engine, but then the ATC was Renee in the tower, and they said, the circuit is yours. There was no time for maydays or pans or anything like that. And when Renee said to me, the circuit is yours, I looked back at the runway, which is your comfort zone. And having had 500 knots, I could gain quite a lot of height. And then I realized there's a good chance I can make it in. The problem is just when you commit yourself, the ejection is no option because it's just built up area. But fortunately, at that time, I've had quite a few hours on the F1, and I realized if you get the slats out, the flaps out, and stand by with our undercarriage, you can kill speed quite quickly. But it just so happened all the way down and landed. And at the stage, I just pushed it open to see if the engine will give me 2 inches if I need it. It was rattling, but it was still there. And those are trustworthy engines. And then the landing was fine, the drag chute worked, everything was fine. And I turned off quite early, but there was no engine, it just cut. Eventually found it. They say it's about, I can't remember, but almost the size of a screwdriver type metal, most probably a screwdriver, that during the testing or maintenance or something went wrong because the checks are so good. And it got lodged into the intake. And somehow, because I was at full power most of it, or all the time, until coming back, and then went back to idle over at Initial, then that piece of metal ran through that engine. And at 7,400 revolutions per minute, if I remember, it created a lot of damage. So sorry, it's quite a long answer, but I think that was the scariest moment. Obviously, the night flying was cancelled, and they did investigation. And the nice thing is then you try and get back into the air. But yeah, that's fortunately with jet engines, they won't just let you down. That answers that. Thanks, Frank. And then Predator, good evening. There's so many questions. I'll try and stick to it because see what I can get. Let me see. There we go. Paul, my question was there any technology exchange between the Russians and SA during the Su-32 flights? For example, Russian IRST? No. That was a very peculiar stage, and they were mostly the test pilots. The guy I flew with was Viktor Pukachev when I went for a flip in the Sukhoi 30. And the other guy there was the chief military guy, was Alexander Kachevsky, if I get the name right. And he was there just to show us a little bit about the aircraft. But no, at that time, I won't say nothing was shared during briefings or debriefings, but when we did some air combat with them, obviously we did our tactics and we tried to show them what we know, not everything, and they were quite surprised that we've not mastered, but we're so good in the beyond visual range tactics with electromagnetic missiles, even though at that time we didn't even have them. We already practiced that. We had head-on capability. We practiced with that. So yes, no, nothing like that. David Smith, I hope I'm not talking too fast, just trying to help as many as I can. Do you have any experience with the relative training of mercenaries in Southern Africa conflicts, not just Soviet bloc, but also executive outcomes? No. I think at the level we were at the frontline squadrons, we make no mistake. We do know the guys. We have seen what they've done. But we haven't worked with them. So sorry, I can't answer that question for you. Munster, I see a Sukhoi on your wall back there. Did you have a history with flying it? Yes, the Sukhoi is right in the back, at the bottom. Yes, that was Viktor Pugachev, and I went for a flight. What happened was in 1995, we had the big air show, SAF 75. The Air Force was 75 years old. We had the French there with the Mirage 2000. Luigi Bancianta flew with them. And then there was a MiG-29 and the two Sukhois that came first to Hoedspruit during the arms deal to show the aircraft. So it was a marketing phase for the Russians to come and show us the aircraft. And can you imagine, we've been in war, been fighting against these aircraft. Well, not the MiG-29 and the Sukhoi 30s, thank goodness. But the bottom line is, can you imagine? But what was so nice? Pilots are pilots. Doesn't matter where you come from. So we became quite friendly with the crew very quickly. And then when they came to, after the air show, we actually escorted the two Sukhois, and we were jumped by one squadron, the Mirage F1AZ, and the AWAC was a UK aircraft. It was such a lovely exercise for being in isolation for so many years. I mean, for us, we just wished we could take fuel and prolong the whole flight towards Louis Trichardt. And then some of us had a choice to go fly either the MiG-29 or the Sukhois. And I thought, no, I'd love to do the Sukhoi because it was at my home base. And I flew with the famous Viktor Pugachev. And you fly in the front. I mean, that's the scary part. But it's such a nice aircraft, so nice to fly. Economics not as nice as, for instance, a Mirage 2000. I flew the Mirage 2000-5 at the time when the French came to visit Louis Trichardt. And of course, that's my home. I mean, I know F1, I know Mirage, but the Sukhoi is really very, very impressive. So that was how I was so lucky to fly with him, and I really, really enjoyed it. I asked him to do the Cobra, the famous Cobra, but the dual-seater it's not fly-by-wire, so he couldn't do that. But his air show, he let me fly that, and he just took over some now and then. That was impressive, and I really enjoyed that. So I hope that answers your question. Let me just see here. Mr. Lau, your name is Yajit. Apologies if I don't get it right. What was standard operating procedure during a raid on any airbase? We standard SOP. Well, it's not to miss, number one, but we never ever did any raid on any airbase. I mean, those days the war, it was more a political thing than a military thing. And the war was war, but we never ever destroyed, or we never had permission to, we never used the word destroy either. You neutralize an NEB base or major infrastructure, so like runways and things like that. And there was almost like a mutual arrangement, it would seem, from the politicians. There was a guerrilla warfare. It wasn't although it took a long time, it was not what is the right words? It was not it was a conflict, a guerrilla warfare. It was not a serious, well, it was serious, but I mean, it was not, the word eludes me, but that was the agreement. So I think the SOP during training, so raid on an airbase, is you have to get in there and have very good surprise. The Russian defense mechanisms and systems are very, very good. And they had that SAM-2s, they had SAM-3s, eventually they had SAM-8s. So you don't just pop up and go and visit a base. And I remember there was a stage that the guys got quite close to Monongwe, and one of the F1s or two of them were damaged by SAM-3s. But there wasn't a raid on an Airbus. I mean, you don't go close to an Airbus with all that defense mechanism. So EW at that time we didn't have. We had only passive, so we can listen, but we didn't even have chaff and flares, so there was no way we would even venture close to an Airbus. Frankie, when you say burn out, do you mean it would damage the Cheetah's radar? No, burnout. I know there's a technical explanation for the word burnout, but the bottom line, no, I don't think that will do, because by the time they pick us up, I mean, once you get closer, we switch off our radars and we just duck dive and try and get underneath. So that's a good question. I never thought about that, but no, nothing burnt. If that answers your question. So that's one way of doing it. But the radar, of course, I mean, that aircraft is it's so huge, that radar is so big. So it burns through the EW, if I can use that word in that context. It burns through the. So they, it doesn't give a nice picture. They never showed us on the videos, but they can still see where we are. So that burnout is basically through our EW. Mark Antel, good evening. Evening, Mark. What are your thoughts on the Cheetahs getting a second chance at life at Draken International? Wow, isn't that so nice? I mean, the F1s were there as well, not our F1s. A very good friend, a colleague of mine, he helped with training. Mini helped with training there at Draken. And we were so envious. He flew the F1B, which we never flew, because he only gave instruction. Because we are not citizens, we wouldn't fly at Draken. And we always wondered and hoped how we can have our own aggressor unit. So when I saw the Cheetah C's going there, because the other day they said that was the last Cheetah C flight, and I watched it because some of them are going to Draken. It's absolutely fantastic. It's sad to have the aircraft leave South Africa, but an aircraft standing in the museum or rotting away in hangars is also not a nice thing. So I'm elated. It's such good news. And will they be employing the same taxis the SAF did? I don't know. It could be. I mean, the tactics evolve so quickly, and it depends on your weapon system, and it depends on the updates on your W system, so I really can't answer that one. But I'm sure there's a lot of tactics from the Air Force that will go through the South African Air Force. And in the end as well, if you take all the tactics, it's evolved around your type of operation, because it evolves about your type of aircraft. So I'm sure there would be some. But yeah, lovely. I hope we get some videos. It'll be nice to see. Martin Strumpf, good evening. Was the inclusion of all aspect missiles on the F1 and Cheetah a difficult thing to train against compared to the rear aspect only missiles? Kaapstad groete, ja, Pretoria groete ook. Baie dankie, Martin. A good question, because yes, that transition, I mean, initially, you go into a fight in a year, kill removal, you can't even see the guy now, you're out of the fight. But we're accustomed to it so quickly, because now it's a new weapon, it's a nice toy. We refer to them as toys. But and the thing is, how do you dodge this? And then this thing that was the most frustrating is when you're getting close within a certain distance, I think you're below 3 miles, even 5 miles, I can't recall. You have to go out of the afterburner. Yeah, and especially with the Cheetah, that's not a good thing to do. The F1, it can accelerate a little bit faster than the Cheetah. The problem with the Delta, once you start turning, obviously you bleed the speed. So it was frustrating at times, but it was such a nice thing to have. And the nice thing with the head-on capabilities is when they don't see you come from underneath, for instance. We always try to use the old Red Baron tactics, well, come from the sun and all those golden rules in air combat. But the bottom line is, once you go down, you can come from below. And then eventually on the Cheetah, when it had even the lovely head-up display, where you got a prediction where the missile will go. And, it's bad luck. It would happen to us, and you fire both missiles, and now you only got your cannons. So, the training, I think the training, adapting to the later versions of missiles, the electromagnetic missiles, that was even more difficult. They fire and forget 9 miles and things like that. Because you have an air combat and you work your butt off and you pull G's engine open, close, the mission controllers, and you don't even see anything. So at the time we had a cycle in training, said, okay guys, that's it, from 3v5s and stuff with all these lovely stuff. We never had, unfortunately we didn't have an AWAC, but we had very good mission controllers. we said, okay, back to basics. And we tried the new cycle and guns only. So you only have 30mm cannons. And the first two soldiers, you have one bullet and get back to basics. And I think that's what made us so, I won't say good, but really good in the sense of, you got to know your aircraft well. So with the involvement of missiles, obviously there's a lot of frustration, but it's like a new toy, It's like getting a new phone. This is lovely, but how does the thing work? Nothing different than that. Timberwolf. Mike, I hope I'm going through the questions fast enough. UFO are being investigated by U.S. Congress. UAP, UFO, U.S. Congress. Have you fellows ever seen vector to anything strange, like the 4 years Nimitz F-18 crew? Tornado pilots here previously saw bogey 90 degrees, darted speed on a penny. Nice question. I'll tell you why. No. The only time that I can recall that we reported and we didn't know what aircraft it was, and I actually shouldn't say that here in front here because it's quite embarrassing. We were on downwind, and we were a 4-ship coming back here over Waterkloof, so at night. And then I could see in my mirrors an aircraft that went from here to there, the lights here, there, in the mirrors. And I asked the ATC, do you have an aircraft just pass through here? And they said, no. And I'll check with Johannesburg radar. No, nothing. And the next sortie, what happened was, then I saw the guys come. I thought, okay, he's going to turn inside me. And the same thing happened. Then I realized it's basically when you overtake it, it's just the lights from passing you, open the mirror and back into that mirror. So embarrassing one, but I didn't tell you about that tonight. So no USOs that I'm aware of. Uppington, FAYP, Frank, in 2006, for some reason, the Cheetahs flew out of FACT that year. 2006, I was already in the airline, so I'm not sure why, but I do know, I remember when we were in Uppington, there was a stage, YP, sorry, Easterplaat, not Uppington, Easterplaat. The reason why the Cheetahs would not fly out of Easterplaat, the runway is just so short. Taking off light aircraft at sea level, no problem, but landing here, so especially when the drag strip doesn't deploy, then you have a major problem. So what we would do is have fuel to go to Langebaan. So I'm not sure what happened and what they did that time, but therefore the Cheetahs, I've never ever seen a Cheetah at Easterplaat, not in my time. So that would be because just for Cape Town for that time, must have been some type of exercise. I'm not sure, but Easterplaat was the F1s. We operated with the F1s out of Easterplaat, but I mean it's a different story. It's 150 knots approach speed versus 190. That's as simple as that. Although the sea, you could go down to 180, 175 if you're careful. So yeah, sorry, I can't answer the question, but I just that the Cheetahs don't usually or have ever flown out of Easterplaat. A highly modernized Mirage F1 is in service with the Moroccan Airforce. Could the SAF recommission the modernized Mirage F1s? No, purely because we don't have them anymore. The F1s, the CZs, they came up to D-checks. That's how much we flew them. We only had 16. We lost a few, I think 1, 2, 3. So they weren't even mothballed. They were parked here at Waterkloof many years ago. The AZs were going to be built into the update, which we now see as the Cheetah C, but they were still busy in the Angolan conflict, so that didn't happen. So a lot of F1As which were still around, and I'm not so sure. I know of one that's still flying, and that's it, and that's the one at Denel. So I'm just trying to think how to answer your question. I don't think so, no. I think it was cost-wise, I don't know how many we have left, and especially at this time. It would be lovely to have that, make no mistake. So unfortunately, sorry, I can't really answer more than that. David Smith, were you aware? Sorry, now I've lost your question. Sorry. What was the best night flight you flew? This is so sensitive. You can see I haven't flown in a while. If I can go back. There's David Smith. Were you aware of the performance of the F1 in Iraqi Air Force at the 80s? And if so, were there any lessons you took from that? The Iraqi Air Force at the time of the 80s as well. I mean, those were the days that we were still in isolation, if I've got my dates right. Yes. And so, yeah, we tried to follow everything we can, and intelligence people would come with stories and have a look at this and that. But really, from the Iraqis, we didn't get anything. Nothing that I'm aware of, or nothing that I can recall. Pity. So I'm not sure what lessons we could take from it, even if we had them, have some information. Obviously, if you have information, it's always something to take from that. Martin, how difficult was the jump to a digital fighter in the teacher from the analog Mirages? It was so nice, So what happened was, at the time, it took a long time to get into it, especially for the youngsters like myself. All right. We're not used to, even today. I mean, IT is a threat. But we had a combat simulator which helped so much. I mean, you can spend hours in that combat simulator. We had mock-ups that you can go and work. So, like the change in the missiles, where you had where it evolved so quickly as well, it was tedious at times. And also, we had hands on throttle and stick. So, I don't play piano, but you learn quite quick how to adapt to that. And once you get into the aircraft and start flying, I mean, then it's the ideal time to really let go and practice. But I mean, the training on the ground was so well organized, so that wasn't a big issue. It was frustrating at times, especially for me. But the youngsters, they just chick, chack, click, clack, and there they go. You're sometimes in a cross and they really shoot you, and you're still trying to get the radar to look where it must. So yeah, it had its growing pains, but fortunately we had the facilities to sit on the ground and practice and get it right. With which aircraft presented the biggest threat to the Mirage F1? Satyajit, if I pronounce it right. It depends, again, on the time. I think at the time, the MiG-21, no. The MiG-23, yes. Certainly the MiG-29s, I mean, the 9G type aircraft, they were just another generation of aircraft. But in our generation at the time, really nothing. And I say that with caution, because obviously it depends on who's flying the MiG-21s. The MiG-23 obviously was the next generation, and even that we were prepared to go in. The thing that kept us maybe on the back foot was we didn't have a head-on capability at the time. The MiG-23s did have a head-on capability. And I mean, the F1s did engage with the MiG-23s, but the tactics that they used, the MiG-23s, and the one aircraft was caught on its own, and it could turn. Make no mistake, that little aircraft can turn. But the thing is, once the guy's now tired of this fight, he puts on his afterburner and he just goes out of the fight. At that time, I was already away from the Mirages, so I didn't have the privilege to do that. But I do have I still have a photo here somewhere from a F1 CZ, where quite an angle photo with the MiG-23 on the side. So the MiG-23s we were prepared to take them on. We did take them on. I was away at the squadron, but the guys did take them on. So sorry, a long question for a straightforward answer. In the same class, nothing. No, the Airforce is such a beauty. Brett Reed from the book Vlamgat. There were some scary stories of flying fighters through our thunderstorms. Did you have any bad weather experiences like that? I tell you, we tried to when the thunderstorms came up, because I was based here in Pretoria. When the weather comes up, if the weather's bad, the enemy doesn't fly, so you don't have to fly either. That was the basis of what we did. In training, we at least we had an ILS in the F1, and we had ILS here at Waterkloof. No ILS up in Ndangwa and those places. So the biggest weather threat was actually flying to Ndangwa. And I remember there was an ADF. I mean, we didn't even have an ADF, and that was it. There was a TACAN, but the TACAN didn't work. And some of those, it wasn't raining, but it was low cloud, and we were in a formation of 4 aircraft. And we descended on time, and we went down, and we actually, when we came out of the cloud, we realized, because we've flown with the Impalas there quite a lot as well, so we know the area, that we were coming up for the Cutland already. So we turned back, and you turn left, and you get to the road that goes from Onjiva down to Oshikati, and we picked that up, and we flew back, and then we picked up Oshikati, the big aerial, and then we know where to turn, and we're over the base. That was quite scary, because we were running out of fuel. I mean, there's nowhere else to land. Fruitfontein is too far away. So yeah, fortunately, we stayed out of the thunderstorms. Nice thing is, if the storms do start developing and they call us back, then it's quite quick to get home. Flying with an airline was far more scarier, because you go through the storms. We don't decide we're not going to fly today. If it's very bad, obviously you have the decision to make. I hope that answers your question. Mr. Udise, I'm not even going to try and pronounce Oshtahanwen. I hope it's that. What is your opinion on the MiG-23 in combat? Was it capable aircraft against the F-1? Yes, it was. I just think at the time the tactics they used, and I'm talking out of what I've learned from the guys, what I've read in books, is that they didn't employ the Russian tactics. They sometimes to get caught with one guy on its own. We had a lot of talk with a Cuban MiG-23 pilot, and he was not engaged. He engaged two C-130 aircraft with missiles at night from high level right down, and so one of the C-130s were damaged. So there were some good pilots flying them, but it would appear that the tactics of the 23 was, I'm careful to say, it wasn't well thought through. Maybe also these guys in the Angolans, especially, I don't even know if the Angolans, they must have flown the 23s, is that they didn't use their tactics as it was used by the Russians themselves. Unfortunately, that's about all I can say about that. So from the comments that I've seen with the 23, it should outperform the F1, but it didn't. So apologies for audio on my end. I have a slight technical error, no fix. So that's from Mike, I suppose. What did you say before launching R-55 or R-53 missiles? What did you use before Foxcoats? That's a good question. I only remember the Fox 1s, Fox 2s, Fox 3 is a gun. Good question. Maybe some of my friends will remember that. I cannot. I mean, we as such, maybe we shot 1, 2, 3, 5, maybe missiles at most during training on a static target, and in the head-ons we had a target pulled by an Learjet, and Fox 2 or Fox 1. That's all. I don't know before the Foxcoats, apart from Yippee and things like that. I can't remember. Was the Mirage 2000 ever considered by the set? Of course, the Mirage 2000. We have the Mirage 3, we have the Mirage F1s. So for us, the Mirage 2000 was the aircraft to go for. I flew, and like I said, in the front of the Mirage 2000 straight at the air show. Sorry, in the back with Luigi Benciant, the display pilot who won the 95 aerobatic trophy for that. And then later on with Eric Gerard, in the front seat of the Mirage 2000-5. Maybe my head's in the way, but there it is in the back. The 2005 taxiing out of a hangar in Louis Trichardt, which is now called Makaru. It is just the bigger brother of the Mirage, and it was such a lovely aircraft. Now remember, all our logistical lines, our test benches, everything was Dassault, was Mirage. So for us, as a squadron or as an Air Force, that would have been the obvious reason to do that. However, with politics changing, BAE came with a package, and they were tanks and trucks and ships and subs and aircraft, which was the Gripen and the Hawk. So, it was so sad we couldn't get the Mirage 2000. The Air Force got the Gripen, and Musa once said to us, he got about over 1,000 hours on the Gripen C. He was one of the 2 squadron commanders as well. And he said, you old Mirage pilots, you don't understand what this Gripen can do. And he explained to us, and it's really it's a very good aircraft, make no mistake. And so are the Hawks. I mean, the Hawks are much better or faster and bigger than the Impalas, for instance. So, yeah, we were sad because, we're not flying our family, but we got new friends, and the Gripens are doing well. Let me just see. Sorry if I'm a bit slow here, my IT. So, yes, it was considered by us, not so much by the Air Force. Purely because of that, because that's what they were here to try and sell the Mirage. But they only had the Mirage, so that was not in the politics to do so. And then also, I can say that now, at the time with the change in politics and the change in government, I mean, the French was always helping us as the previous government. So they, were not too keen to help us. I'd rather go to the Swedish people who were pro the anti-apartheid, I would say companies, but states rather than that. So, yeah, politics, eh? So, what, in your opinion, on the shootdown of the Pakistani F-16 by an Indian MiG-21 Bison? I've seen that, but unfortunately, you don't get too much to Bison. It must probably be Bison. Unfortunately, I can't comment because, how does the F-16 get shot down by a Bison, MiG-21? I tell you, it depends again on the situation. I mean, I can go shoot down a Sukhoi if they're not careful, because once you have cannons, you have missiles. I mean, but in a normal situation, in a normal one-to-one with maybe the equally well-trained pilots. That seems strange, but we didn't get much information out of it. So yeah, of course, a MiG-21 and a F-16. That means we can shoot it down as well. There's so many circumstances, and the system as a whole is what you must actually look at, not the pilot or not only the aircraft, just the whole system. Martin, did you ever consider a Silver Falcons tour before going to SA? Hey, you're hitting the soft spots here. Yes, of course. Very quickly, it's an interesting question, and I'll tell you why. When I went back to the Silver Falcons were the instructors at Air Force Base Langebaanweg. So when I left 3 Squadron, I went to Langebaanweg for first the Notte and the Harvards, and then to Langebaan to do instruction. I was only there for a year, not even a year, and I was what we call a MAYOT, the Mobile Air Operations Team commander at Ruakana, which was MAYOT Charlie, if I recall. So I was deployed there for 2 or 3 months, I think. And this is just what we do. We pilots GD, we do a lot of groundwork as well. And during that time, Arthur Piercy, a very good friend and colleague of mine, he had that accident in Rundu when they met with the MiG-23s, and he was hit by a head-on type missile. And unfortunately, the aircraft just had a bit of shrapnel, but he returned to base and he tried to land the aircraft, and unfortunately the drag chute was out, the hydraulics were out. And when he ran off the runway, the ejection seat went off because the F1, out of the negative G as it stopped, then the ejection seat went off, which is, he didn't pull the ejection seat. The F1 has got a 0.90 knot seat, and he was paralyzed. And I'm answering a long answer, but the interesting part, I was still sitting at Ruakana when Martin Lowe, who was then back at 3 Squadron as well, and he asked, listen, would you like to come back to 3 Squadron? I said, I would love to, but I would also like to finish my training, my instructor stint, because, it's frowned upon when you don't finish your instructor stint. Now, this was for operational reasons, so I went back to the squadron after a year, not even a year at Langebaanweg. So I never had the opportunity, but I would have jumped at it at all time. I was a liaison officer for the Falcons for a short while, go there with the radio to Stellenbosch, I remember, and talk about the show. And I once also ferried an Impala from a show with them. And usually when you get home, then they just do a little bit of aerobatics, not a show. And the guy said, that's strange. I've never seen 5 Falcons, but there's 5. And then the officer commanding, or the leader of the Falcons said, and he called me and he said, hey, you're not supposed to be in the team when we do aerobatics. He said, but you're not giving a show. And I thought, I can fly aerobatics. I've been flying Mirages as well. And yeah, look, and that's the closest I got to the Silver Falcons. Dave Knudsen was his name, and he said, yeah, okay, don't do that again, rather become part of the team. But you had to work for that, and unfortunately I wasn't there to do that. Again, a question, would the SAF Mirage F1 be more successful if it had a radar-guided missile like this, the Super 530? We had 530s, but unfortunately, they were the old ones. Of course, if we had them, it would have been so nice. If we just had the V3Ss we got later on, the snakes as we call them, it would have been far better, because then we once we had the infrared head-on capability, we trained day and night with them. We trained up to 4v4s at stages with this missile. And, it was such a huge advantage. But it's like anything, your weapon systems there, your pilots is there, and your missile systems, your EWs there. At that time, the EW, we had chaff and flares, that was it. But the training was intense, and we were ready to use it. But unfortunately, after 88, I must never use that word, unfortunately, the conflict ended. No, fortunately, the conflict ended, but unfortunately, we could never put that to practice. So definitely, especially that 530 as well, long range, that would be wonderful. Stefan Regenas, if I pronounce it right, I was a Swiss Mirage III fighter pilot and instructor. Well, nice to talk with you, Stefan. We once had the Swiss chief of intelligence here. He was a general, I think, at Louis Trichardt, and I took him for a flip in the Cheetah D, and all he wanted to see is not the mountains, not nothing, just fly over the Lowveld and watch it. Nice. I've got a lovely picture where we're sitting at the Mirage 3 in Zurich. That's at the runway 35. I think the pub there, or the restaurant's called 35. Closest I got to Mirage, the Swiss 3, Mirage 3. Bravo Juliet. Hello, Jitter. Once upon a time back, sometime in the 91, 92, we met on a flossy flight between Aces and Kloof when you were on the Ovid project. I was the loadie on the flight. Well, good evening. I can't remember being in the Ovid project, but what could be is that there were so many projects with the names that we could have flown or did some tests. 99, 92. No. Yes, so at 91, 92, I was still, I'm just seeing the dates. Yes, I was still in Mirages F1s. So could well be that we did project work, but I just can't recall the other project. But hello, nice to talk to you again. The ladies, they worked so hard. I mean, I remember you guys working there, especially the floods going into and up from the Grootfontein and the Rundus and the Mapachas and the Mondanwas. Bravo, Juliet, again. 87, Juliet. Thank you for sharing. Oh, my pleasure, 87, Juliet. Again, what is your opinion on the Sukhoi 30 MKI? I'm not too well versed with the Sukhoi 30 we had. I'm not sure about the Mark 1, but I'm sure that, remember that Sukhoi we had is a dual seater. You can see it in the background. It was called the Sukhoi 30 because, and I'm sure maybe you're talking about the one, and it was a 30 just for the arms deal to come and show. It was a demo model. That's beauty. It's like sitting on a drum with, yes, fire going in the back. Like I said, the ergonomics is not that nice. It's not what we used to. But you have something that's in kilometers an hour. The other one is nautical miles. There's a bit of a mix, which makes it a bit difficult. But it's not like the Western ergonomics. But then the Russian stuff, I mean, it's strong and it works and it's big. And then the size of the aircraft, I mean, you sit higher. It was quite daunting when you sit up there, coming for landing as well. You must remember that it doesn't go too far down. So if it's that one you're referring to, it's really a nice aircraft. It handles well. Those engines, it's just, they couldn't understand why we want to fly in afterburner most of the time. But once they've flown in the Cheetah D, then they knew, unfortunately, the aircraft was heavy and it was underpowered. So yeah, lovely. I was offered, and I think I said that, to fly the Sukhoi 32, which is a single-seater that was there. And of course, I couldn't just say yes and go. I had to go through the channels. And I remember Chief of the Airforce then, Willem Hafter, he said, I know you'd love to go and do that. The problem is at that stage, remember, we come from a conflict where we were fighting against the Russians, and now we're mates with them. We want to buy the equipment, we look at the equipment. So if something had to go wrong, maybe if something went wrong, the diplomatic things would have been quite tricky. The general that was a one-star general there at Air Force Base Jitter says, no, you fly. If something goes wrong, ejection seat works well. And of course it works well. Because aircraft speaks Russian, and my Russian is really pasiba. That's about one word. I think I know 3. So unfortunately, I didn't have the chance. Rob Bauman, evening. Lots of elevated terrain down the bottom of Africa, challenging in a fast jet. At the bottom of Africa, no, yes, it's lovely. It's so nice. We did a lot of training here through the mountainous ranges, is what you're referring to. Compared to here up in the southern Angola, it's flat. I mean, you start getting to know the trees. Obviously, you go to Lubanga, there's huge mountains there, but we seldom flew that far in, and they're not low level anyway. But lovely, the mountainous terrains to go and fly here in South Africa, it's just beautiful. Obviously, when good weather as well. So it wasn't really challenging. You get, speed is relative. In the first flight, I remember in the Mirage III Petersburg, my first Mirage sortie with Ben Onroldi, he had to pick up the gear. I mean, this was just so nice. You're sitting there like a baboon in a Sputnik and just loving the scenery and things. But it's relative. Soon you get into it. The hardest change was going back to the Harvard to go and fly the Harvard. I mean, I couldn't navigate that thing because it was going slow. You should see everything, but I just couldn't. Sergeant Steele, oh, thanks. Nice. Just a comment. Mirage F1, a strong plane. Smithley, Dorat, a strong plane? Yes. It's a bit more daintier, if I can use the word, than the Mirage C, which was a sturdy thing. But the F1 has slats and flaps, and it had small wings, very high wing loading wings. But it's in no sense not as strong as the Mirage C, but it had this lovely undercarriage, which makes it a little bit softer, if I can use the term. Where the Mirage C is a sturdy aircraft, and you just plonk it down on the runway, and it'll go. So it was strong enough, for sure. Then from Predator. Hello, Predator. How did you feel doing your first live fire exercise? Oh, man. How can I explain? I don't want to go into the movies with the girlfriend and first kiss, something like that, but it's very similar. It's such a nice thing. I mean, we had, and it was on the Impala, the Mark II, and we had two 30 millimeter cannons. Now, when the Impalas came to South Africa initially, and the guys did firing it, the vibration was so much they had to put reinforcing plates down with the cannon below. And it's so that you can only fire one cannon and not both. And once they had the aircraft fixed, to go there and you go fire those two DIFA cannons, they're not guns, the cannons. It was so nice. And then later on, of course, the Mirage III's, the F1s, we all had the same DIFA, 30 millimeter DIFA cannon. I think it was Sat Rapa who said there's no kill like a gun skill. No. Beautiful. It was so nice. Um, Brett Reed, good evening. Do you have any stories from when you flew Impala Mark II in conflict? Brett, there's a few books behind me. There's so many stories. Because I really enjoyed my tours, and we were there in the time that the conflict was escalating. And we had, it's low level all the time, most of the time. We seldom ever go higher than 50 or 100 feet. Our main mission was armed reconnaissance. And, at the time, the limitations of the war were so strict. At a stage, you're only allowed to fire when you pick up convoys. Convoys that was our food. And if you a swiper convoy, and we're not allowed to fly in there, their military was the MPLA convoy. And it's actually so easy to see because you see dust, and the cannons are armed, the rocket pods are armed, and then you see this, if I recall, a blue cap, yellow back, that's swiper. If you see this military camera one, that is the MPLA. And at the time, they were tippers and things. They were building roads and things like that. It's not that they were armed with cannons and things, but that was our job, to try and stop them from building roads to get into the southwest border. And I'll never forget, at a stage, it was free and open for all when they expect an attack. And once we were, and then they said, okay, no MPLA, you're only allowed to fire and swap. And my Mingman is the late Andre Boert. I remember he flew with me. And we did a low level, and yes, just 6, 7, 8 trucks full of troops on the road, very close to just past on Jiva. And I thought, oh man, it's a sign of courtesy. So we went over them and wagged the wings, and we carried on. And when we came back, when they wanted to know, why did we fire at these MPLA guys? Because they were, I don't know how many injured, I don't know if there were any deaths, fortunately not. I said, we didn't, and look at my arms. Look, when you come back, they always look at your ammo. How many rounds have you fired? How many rockets you fired? Because that was written down somewhere. There was not. We didn't fire anything. So then we figured out later, the intelligence guy said, they got such a fright, because they don't know that we're now not allowed to shoot them. They jumped from the trucks at, I don't know what kilometers an hour. So yeah, that was the conflict, it was up and down. But the Mark II was so nice to fly, and it was so beautiful. But in time, first they were firing at us with AK-47s and RPGs. I remember once the RPG came past and then just go down, and then SAM 7s and then SAM 9s. So that's how the conflict escalated. And the Mark II was really not, up to those defenses. I was once hit by I must remember where it was. I think it was it's either a ZU-23, the -2, or the smaller cannon, 17.6 something, I can't remember. And it shot at my whole flap hinge in the back. Fortunately, it was hanging there. It didn't give me any problem. And then we realized, but now it's an incendiary rounds, and there's HE rounds. I mean, this is how this thing escalated. So yeah, it was so nice to fly the Mark II. Nicer to fly the F1. It's faster, so you're a bit more protected. Frank Moody, Kafir versus Cheetah. Would you have preferred the American engine in our Cheetahs, which is the J79, the Phantom, as well, or were you happy to keep the French engine? We had the 9K50, which is the Mirage engine. And yes, anything that gives more power, we would love to have. So personally, if we could, and the irony is, it was an 09C engine that we used. The 9K50s came from the F1s, and the Kafirs changed them, and they put in the J79, if I have my terminology correct. And I'm sure that aircraft is a bit more powerful than 9K50. The thing is, when the Kafirs they also had a lot of modifications done, but the Cheetah had even more modifications done. There's a plug-in, put more in W, more this, the in-flight refueling probe. So, there were a lot of drag as well. But we were very happy with the 9K50 because we know it so well. I mean, we've flown a lot of hours on the 9K50. But anything that goes stronger than the other thing, of course, it's like a car. It's the same thing. We would take that any time. I must just find my place here. Good evening, Pitkun, greeting from Israel. Oh, especially from the big brother of the Cheetah. Yes, Kafir. And nice to see you, and not to see you, nice to hear from you. Yeah, the Kafir. I think at the time, because of the secrecy of everything, it would have been lovely to just bring the Kafir here and fly the Kafir, but obviously it didn't work out like that. So from Aviator 01, did you fly the Super F1 with the Russian engine? If so, what was it like? No, I didn't. There was only the project officer and maybe one or two people that fly. That aircraft is still, I think, at Denel with the Russian engine. They were very, very happy with that engine. It fitted in nicely. Obviously, a lot of changes because the ergonomics in the Russian things are just other way around from the Western. I've seen it perform. It performed much better than with the 9K50. But unfortunately, that's about all I can say. Yes, it was nice, but I don't know how nice. I think fuel efficiency in those, I can't remember. No, sorry, that's about all I can say about that. If you contact me at some time, I can phone them and ask them. But yeah, they were very impressed with it. Obviously, the modification to the aircraft was quite significant. So I don't think it would have been financially wise or economically wise to do so. Cheetah, yeah, there's no tar like a Cheetah. Thanks for that comment. Aviator, oops, then my screen goes about. Sorry, I just want to find Aviator 01. 87 Juliet, Aviator 01, great question, yes. Paul Brockbank, what were the strengths and weaknesses of using the F1 versus the MiG-21 in combat? I think for us, the F1 in the MiG-21 compared really, really well. The Mirage III and the MiG-21 is maybe more on par. With the F1, it's just got with combat flap and things at the station, certain speed ranges we can turn faster, we can accelerate faster, and depending on what missile systems you have, it's not just here's the F1, here's the MiG-21, how you compare it. I think our training at that time was obviously the Angolans just had the aircraft. Their training was not at the stage or the level that we had. And then when the Cubans came in, they also had some guys that fly well and some were not so good. And on average, I think at the time we were happy where we were with the F1 versus the MiG-21. And in the combat we had as well, it was clear that they don't apply the tactics like the Russians put out their tactics. That's how you do it. And they didn't apply it like that. So once you mix with your tactics, then it's like with the 23, then things do, you lose a lot of strength. But put the two aircraft next to the other, I mean, it's two mean machines and beauties as well. Even the Mirage III, obviously the MiG-21, I can't remember with the BIS and the MFs, they had more fuel in as the Mirage III because they had more fuel tanks in it. And the question again is the radars were equally bad, if I can use it. The poor, it's just old, it's old radars. But depending what missiles you have, and if we had the head-on missiles, it would have been much better. That's similarly to them as well. So yeah, the weaknesses and strengths is very mixed up in there. I think the biggest strength for us in the whole equation was just our training was so much more, I won't say superior, no, I've never used that word, but we trained so hard and we flew a lot and we did a lot to get into the combat things. Martin, how did you get the idea for the 2v1 Cheetah? Cheetah display, how difficult was it to perform? Very nice. Actually, it was not my idea. It came from Johan Duplessis, very good friend and colleague of mine. Incidentally, he was a wingman in the first MiG that was shot down. And he was at the time already at the squadron when the Cheetahs came up. And every 6 months biannually, we had the big weapons demonstration. At the bombing range at Roodeval, and where a lot of people invited there, especially the attachés and the generals would be there, and we demonstrate the power of the Airforce from the Alouettes to the Mirages to everything, and then the Cheetahs came in. And then the idea came up, why don't we do a little air combat type display? Because everybody does solo shows. We throw live weapons, bombing, rockets, 30 millimeters, so it's actually quite a big show. And the idea came up from them. And then when I got to the squadron, with the Cheetah Cs, then I think they did it in the Cheetah Ds, and when the Cheetah Cs came in, and correction if I'm wrong, Yuan, then we decided let's carry on with it, and then it was a display really, because it was not difficult to perform. It was a rehearsed display. At this stage you turn, at this stage, and I was the singleton, and the problem was for the people sitting there, especially the non-pilots, and which is the singleton and which is not. Incidentally, and I'm interrupting myself. One thing that helped us a lot as well, and I think I mentioned it before, our commentary control was really very good, because we always fought against each other. So you don't know whether it's a MiG-23 or the F1. They're all F1s. And similarly with the Cheetahs, these are all Cheetahs. Sometimes we fly with one squadron, we fly dissimilar. As soon as we fly dissimilar, then the fights are so much easier. So I think there's one aspect as well that we really did well in commentary and control. So then we just decided that we'll take a belly tank on the Cheetah C and paint it white. But now this air combat thing, I mean, it's seldom that you actually see the belly tank. It's only when you turn in the front. And then the idea came that we have to build, we paint an aircraft, which was called Spotty. And the Spotty is right here next to me on the side. So that's another long story. I don't want to get away from your question. So it wasn't difficult to perform. To come and perform it here at Air Force Base Waterkloof, I'm sitting here on downward of Waterkloof. Yeah, it's 5,500 feet. Luchtvaart 3,000 feet. That was a bit more dicey, especially for the singleton, because you bleed speed so quickly, and you try and keep the show pass. You try and get to 6G and turning. So, but that display was rehearsed, so it wasn't that difficult. Robert Feely, evening. Is there one fight that you remember just because you were flying? And if so, why? If there was one flight, sorry. I was so fortunate, I was really the hog at the squadron at the stage, and I had about 3 tours just on the F1s, and then I had 5 years on the Cheetahs. But I think that one flight I'll remember, and it's up here on the wall as well, is the one where I lost that engine. I mean, that's a scary one. And the Cheetah was where I went into a full spin with a belly tank, and those are the ones I remember. There were quite a few other scary, but not too scary things. And then, of course, the MiG intercept. I mean, you'll never forget that. And I'll never forget how, I mean, that's what we trained for day in, day out. And I was so excited and yet so disgusted and so disappointed that I didn't get to get into the mix closer than what I did. So if you have an hour, I can answer that question for you. So basically those 87 Juliet, thanks from AV. There we go. Lock on now. Wow, like that call sign. It's great to place a question to the men who flew the sexiest plane. Like that part called Mirages. The Brigade Bateau of combat jets, of course, in the SAF. Is the Mirage III CZ similarly to fly compared to the Mirage F1? I never flew the Mirage CZ, but I did fly the Mirage EZ and the Mirage 3 EZs and the Mirage 3 D and D2s. But only during the combat conversion phase at Air Force Base Petersburg. So I don't know. We did do some air combat, but not dissimilar, because it's just to get to the phases. But no, the F1. I mean, the F1 had like a nice radar. I nearly said like a radar, which means nice. Which the Mirage 3s didn't have. The Mirage C obviously had an older version of the Cyrano. But I mean, in air combat, I mean that Mirage 3, if it turns, wow. We escorted a lot of the Mirage 3 RZs and R2Zs, the reconnaissance versions in the Angolan conflict. And if that aircraft turns and you're not there with that turn, the poor guy doesn't have an escort anymore. So that made the Mirage 3 great. And we had to be very careful. The turning performance is just amazing. But during the turning, obviously, they also lose speed. And that's where we can just stay off in the fight. And we had more fuel. We sometimes went to Leidenburg and combat against 2 squadrons, then Mirage 3Cs. And we're going to attack and engage and fight, and then they would disengage out of fuel, and we wait for the second pair to come in, and we have another combat. Now, obviously, they realize as well, they delay a little bit, it's nothing, it's the same in sport and rugby. Delay, and once we get into the fight, obviously we had to disengage before them. But now that F1 was so light, and once you get your little lower range speeds here, about 350 knots, and you can use your combat flap and the slats, and then we turn with them. And then obviously trying to get out of the fight, we just have to plan that. So yes, that's all I can look at that one. Lock in now. Frank Moody, a very NB question. Will you be joining us South Africans in playing DCS when the Mirage F1 is released? I take DCS as like a combat system. Apologies for my ignorance. Well, of course, I'm not saying I can do that, but of course, anything flying, anything goes, anytime. So when the F1 is released, so Frank, yeah, you can send me some of the details, and of course, hopefully something will still come back. Rob Bauman, the Sharks, sorry, let me just see a locker now. What was it all about? The F1 with the white nose, also known under the nickname Flying Pencil. I'm not so sure about the nickname, but could be. That's a good question. Especially the guys that look at the color schemes. At this stage, and I mentioned it just now, because even if we fight against the one squad with the F1 AZ, and we did, for instance, at Air Force Base Durban, once a year we go down and we do what we call supersonic ACM. You can go supersonic, you're 30 miles away from the coast, we go supersonic, and you're not at 12,000 feet limited, you're right down to 3,000 feet, and that's at the coast. So, you can sustain 7G. The problem was we still struggled to see each other. So somebody came up with the idea, and that's why the Flying Pencil may become. It took a while, because if you put pencil, for instance, that on the aircraft, I mean, that can lead to corrosion and things like that. So somebody did the homework, said, this white chalk, it's a white chalk type paint, won't damage the aircraft, especially the nose. Remember, that's where the radar was. So if we had 8 aircraft, 4 of them would have white noses. And then also similarly, you had CZ with white noses. I don't think the AZs ever had white noses. But for us now, because to try and do more realistic, dissimilar flying, some of the F1s had white noses. And that's the only reason why we had that. It looked quite funny. We didn't want to fly with the one with the white nose, because you could see it quite far as well. So that was the only reason we did that, is for more realistic, dissimilar training. Tampul, Pakistani also shot down a Sukhoi 30 Mark 1. Wow, I didn't know that. Well, it just shows you, once you get, that was not too long ago, I suppose. Once you get out of the game, unfortunately, also you don't have the time, or I would say not the time, you don't get all this information. Another question from Oshtu Haven. What tactics or changes would have made the SAF Mirage F1 more successful in air-to-air combat in the Angola conflict? I think just one thing, and that was a head-on capability. Because then we would have, we were already mixing up with the MiG-23s, but then we would have been able to employ anytime, anywhere. And, the one tactics they have, and I was on the ground at the time there, close to Kuvalai, is when they, before they go and do an attack on the troops or something, they had about 16 aircraft and a gaggle of geese flying there. But then they had a low-level armed reconnaissance or armed recce, well, that's not the right word for it, but they had low-level counter patrol aircraft flying low-level with head-on missiles. So, you'd be very dumb to go and mix in there. And also they had radar. I mean, we're well out of our radar. There's no radar even at Rundu. So I think that's the one thing. And then maybe another engine. Yep, power. But no, if we had the missiles, it would really have helped. And so too, if we had active EW, of course. But I mean, they didn't have really something that the EW would have made such a big difference, but the missiles would have. Tampul, your thoughts on recent purchase of the JF-17 by Argentina? I just recently saw that, and I was quite surprised. But Tim, unfortunately, sorry, I don't want to comment on something I don't really know the background. But I was surprised because you see the JF and it's going to Argentina. But also, if you take where Argentina is coming from, with absolutely no money and who's helping them, I'm not so sure how much politics behind it. So I'm sorry, Tim, I really can't answer that. I said I was surprised, and that's my thoughts on it, unfortunately. Jason Cole, how are we doing there in time, Mike? Still good. What, in your opinion, was the best? Sorry, sir. I'm just on my Cobus Toerien. Was the best mark of Mirage? The best mark of Mirage was the Rafale, in my opinion. I'm joking, but I'm not really joking. The F1, of course, because it was the latest mark. Mark F1. The Mirage 2000 obviously is the superior brother of the Mirage III F1 2000. That's why I said the Rafale. I mean, that's a big, big problem. But if you ask me which aircraft we would take, I'll take a Mirage. I'll take anyone. I'll go fly. It was so lovely to fly. Sorry, Mark, obviously your opinions on the JF-17. Sorry, there was just a question just now from, it was your question. Sorry, I'm really not up to speed with the JF-17s. When these things started happening, I was looking into Airbus or Airbus A340 books and airlines. So I'm sorry I can't answer on that. Do you have any memorable experience with Pakistani Airforce? No. We read about it a lot because at the time they were almost rated about 4th in the world, and because they also had F1s and because their tactics were a mix of, I think they had quite a good mix between Western and Eastern type tactics. But no, we didn't have any experience with them.
So I'm just going to jump in here, Cobus. Let's say we got 10 minutes left, guys. So maybe Cobus. So let's finish up at 1:15. So if you can pick whatever questions you have left, that'd be great.
I'll try and find some guys we haven't had here before. Thanks, Mike. John Ellis, he means the radar overplaying the EW aircraft. Yes, exactly that. Thanks, John. Let me see if there's anything that I can answer very quickly. Golden Funders Memories, I think we spoke about that in the interview. The comms engagement you had, the mix, I alluded to that in the interview as well. You mentioned part one that you may have the tape somewhere. Yes, I still do, Kuni. But that was taped from the Canberras. Really not much, it was more a chase than a fight. Mirages are for sure the legacy aircraft. Oh, yes, of course. Then Christian Miranda, why was no raid on Cuban MiG-23, expeditionary MiG-23 on the ground ever attempted? I think I answered it a bit earlier on. We never, ever had a plan to take on the airfields or the bases. In fact, that was a guerrilla warfare, if I can use it. It wasn't, I still can't get onto the word. War was never declared. So, you can't go there and destroy infrastructure. So that was a political reason why we didn't do it. Of course, if we want to end the war, you should have take out the air defense systems and take out the airfields. But it wasn't a war. It was just a conflict. I hope that answers that. There's a lot of questions always about that. Martin, hi, was a change from turn and burn to cruise flying is a difficult adjustment? No. I think at the time I knew my time in the Air Force was coming up and I was given a chance to go to SA, so I grabbed it with both hands and I loved it. I really enjoyed that. What was the F1 fuel consumption? Philip Boerta, kan ek Afrikaans praat? What was the F1 fuel consumption and max fuel load with external tanks, time and air availability? Cobus, it's a difficult question. Philip, a difficult one to answer, but we could use 3 tanks if you wanted to. RP35's 1,200 liters, I remember. We carry 4,200 liters. So, if you can go to Cape Town and back maybe, but I mean, what's the point? But in air combat, you drop the tanks and you only have your internal 4,200. And that gives you about 10 minutes, if I recall, depending again how far you're away from your base. So yeah, look, it did burn through fuel, not as fast as the 09C, but it did burn quite fast through that. Martin, thanks. I see some more Afrikaans coming in. Amazing. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Bye, donkey. Let's see if there's anything else. Well, thank you. Well, guys, I hope I answered some questions. And of course, if anybody really wants to have more information, I can find it for you, or I can give it to you. You're most welcome through Mike maybe to contact me, and I wouldn't mind maybe an email. I'll leave that up to Mike, but you're more than welcome. So nice to talk aviation, and especially afterburner aviation. So Frank, dankie oom. Dankie my seun. Thank you. Mike, I think that's it for the evening, and I really some excellent questions, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, that's perfect. So thank you very much, guys, for the excellent questions, and hopefully you enjoyed this Q&A with Cobus. I learned a lot there, like I didn't, already learn in the first interview, but I'm sure we can get Cobus back on. But if you want to, get some questions to Cobus, if you want to contact me, just go to crewinterview.tv via the email, and I can forward it on to Cobus if he's happy with that. But thank you very much for coming on. It's been a great Q&A, and Cobus, thank you very much for joining us. It's been brilliant.
Mike, I appreciate it. Thanks for the time. I see also even my neighbor is also tuned in, Umbran.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, so I took far in the way to my neighbor as well. But no, Mike, thanks so much, and I appreciate the the opportunity and good work. I watch your shows. It's really so nice to hear from different guys.
Well, thank you very much. And guys, in this on the comments there, if you haven't watched the 2-part interview, go to aircrewinterview.tv and you can watch both parts. The first part is on him flying, or Cobus flying the Mirage F1, and the second part is on the Cheetah. But thank you very much, guys, and cheers, Cobus. Thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Bye bye.